Good evening and welcome to Alan's Italy. Tonight's show is going to be the last show that I'm going to be doing on Tuscany, that from the trip we took in 2015, in May of 2015, May and June. And it's about a really amazing town in the Chianti region of Tuscany. The town is Volpaia, and I'll talk about that a little more in a little while. Right now, today is April 8th, 2016, and the presidential candidate, Bernie Sanders, has just been given an invitation by the Pope to come to the Vatican for a special conference. And he's going to be going there a week from, let's see, next Friday, I guess, the 15th of April. So I guess that would be next Friday. And I would like to volunteer my expertise in Italy to Bernie Sanders, Senator Sanders. I've been to Rome, I would say 13 or 14 times. So to Bernie, I can tell him where to eat. I could tell him some of the really good sightseeing. He'll be right in the Vatican, and somebody should give him a really wonderful tour of the Vatican Museum, which is really, Vatican Museums, I should say. There are actually several that are all world-class museums. But I hope he gets some time to actually walk around the city of Rome. I have a feeling he won't be, though. I have a feeling he'll go for the conference and then come right home, because he's, as you know, busy running a presidential primary campaign. But, you know, so to Bernie, if you're there and need a recommendation, contact alansitaly@gmail.com. I'll answer you immediately, and I'll look for your email, and I could give you the names of some really great restaurants in Rome. Nothing really near the Vatican. I don't really know any great restaurants near the Vatican, but I certainly know some great restaurants not far from the Vatican, so you can have some wonderful Italian food there. So that's to Bernie. And now, tonight's show. So let me flip back to albums, and here, I think that looks pretty good. And that, wow. Oh, okay, so there it is. There's the town of Volpaia. And I'd like to first tell you the story of how we wound up coming to this town in Italy. So this is, let me make that bigger so that everybody could see that. Well, oh, yes, I first wanted to talk about this at first. These are the upcoming shows that I have planned. We have a trip planned to Italy for the end of May, and between now and the end of May, I should be able to do probably 4 or 5 shows, and these are the ones I have in mind. The next show after this, I will talk about day trips from the town of Varenna on Lake Como, which should be a really great show. And then show number 121 is a show which is called Varenna Then and Now. And those of you who've seen the show over the past several years know that I love doing shows which talks about the 19th century photographs of a particular location in Italy, and then finding the exact location nowadays and comparing the two and showing the difference between them, and also the very strong similarity between the way something looked, let's say, 150 years ago and how it looks now. So I have a book about photographs from Varenna, and that's what that show is going to be focused on. Then I'm in the middle of planning something which will focus on the method of actually planning a trip and taking a trip to Italy. And then I have an album that I put together a couple of years ago where I talk about my favorite bridges in Italy. And one thing as I watch the opening montage of pictures that comprises the introduction to the show, it always occurs to me that some of those pictures are really spectacular, and that's the reason I keep them. And it might be very, very interesting if I actually analyzed all of the photos in that opening montage, which really hasn't changed in over 4 years. So that might be a very nice show, and that's what I have planned between now and certainly the end of May. And then, of course, when we get back from the trip in the early part of June, that's going to be a kind of a busy time. I'm personally am scheduled to have cataract surgery in the middle of June in both eyes, first on June 14th for the first and then the 28th for the other. So I don't know what kind of shape I'll be in to do a show. I assume I'll be okay. Everybody tells me that you can pretty much do what you normally can do after the first couple of days. So if so, we'll be bringing home with us from Italy some really wonderful photos. So I'll get to that when the time comes. But right now, there's the map of Italy. In green is the map, once again, that I've used many, many times, of Tuscany. And there's the region that I'm going to be focusing on. In red is all of Tuscany. There's Firenze, which is the Italian name for Florence. And then, actually, I'm looking at Siena, which is the town that we're going to be spending 4 days in this upcoming trip. So and I haven't really focused on Siena, which is really one of the great, great towns of central Italy. So hopefully that'll be the focus of several shows that I'll be doing when we get back. And of course, there's Pisa and Lucca, which I've done shows on, and Arezzo over there in the east, which I haven't really focused on very much. But there's Chianti, and as you can see, Chianti is right below Florence. So if you head south out of Florence, you will eventually come to the Chianti region on Route 222, actually, I remember that. And these are this is from the trip we took in 2009. I call it Travels in Chianti. And what we did was we rented a car out of Florence, and we drove south on that Route 222, south into the Chianti region. And the towns that we focused on during that trip were, as you could see, Greve and Panzano, Castellina, Rada, Gaiole, and Cavrilia. And this is the route that we took, and you could see up on the left-hand side Florence, and we drove out of Florence, headed south to Greve, and here's the trip we took, and we actually stayed in the town of Greve and used that as a base for exploring the region. In retrospect, probably I would have stayed further south, like let's say in Castellina or in Rada, and then we'd have some up here and some over there. But we were in Greve. Every time we wanted to go someplace, we would have to head pretty far. So we visited Panzano and Castellina, and then we headed east to Rada over here, and then Gaiole over here, Cavrilia, and then the last part of that trip, we wound up back here in the town of Felligna Valdarno, which is the town where my friend Luca lives, Luca and Mary, my friends Luca and Mary. In looking at this map, you'll notice something very interesting. Here we go, south and then east and then north again back to Felligna, and we kept skirting this one town right here in the middle, the town of Volpaia. And there was a reason for that. I actually wanted to visit the town of Volpaia, but didn't do it because I have this fear of driving, as you know, in Italy, and that town was kind of high up, and I was just a little tentative, so I kept skirting that area, and I always said that someday I'd like to go to that spot. Hopefully, if I can, perhaps have my friend Luca or my other friend Lydia drive us there. But here we are on that first trip, headed out of Florence in the direction of Greve in Chianti. That's that sign. The second sign from the bottom says Greve in with a capital C, which means in Chianti. 17 kilometers. So we were on a road where we could head back to Florence, which was, obviously 39 kilometers, and Greve, which was 17. And then, further south, actually, I think we're probably south of Greve now because the distance to Panzano is only 11 kilometers. But there's Castellina all the way on the top and some of the other major towns of Tuscany. And this is what a trip south out of Florence into the region of Chianti looks like. It's, absolutely beautiful country, to say the least. So we headed south in this region, and there's the road we took. And that road was either, kind of a very narrow road, as you could see there, or a much wider road, as you'll see in future pictures. But here we go along the road. This was in January, remember, so there were no other cars on the road. And these are the pictures of the landscape that we passed along the way. And you could see the vineyards in the foreground, which obviously in the month of January were not very active. But this is like spectacular country, as you could see. And this was the town that we actually stayed in. This is the town of Greve. And this picture was photographed from the window of the hotel that we stayed in when we were in Greve. And that blue car right there in the front is the car that we used. Now, you could park in this town overnight, but once it reached like 9 o'clock in the morning, you had to move your car. And it was obviously, just before 9, because you could see that there's only in that one area where I'm parked, there's only 3 cars total. Everybody else had moved, except for a few cars, again, further into the piazza. And then, of course, back on the road. And it's a country road. But you get, as you could see, spectacular scenes. And because there were no cars on the road, we could, very freely stop whenever we felt like it. And this is as good as the road got at this point, which it turns into a 2-lane highway, that's clearly marked right there, as opposed to those other roads which were a bit more rural. I believe that town in the distance that you could see up there on top of that hill is the town of Castellina, which is the direction we were headed in. A very evocative photograph with the typically Tuscan trees, the cypress trees. Some more spectacular views of the landscape. And this is, I believe, the town of Castellina, which, you could see all stone houses and a very narrow street. I don't believe we drove on this street. I believe we parked the car and simply, walked around. And there's the road again. And, it's a beautiful scene. And there you see that green garbage pail over there on the right. But that's, the way it is. This is the town of Gaiole. And I remember the day we were in Gaiole, it was a very rainy day, and we really did not get a chance to see it that well. But this is the photograph that was taken of Gaiole. There's a bench right there in the front, and you can see, of course, that nobody is sitting there. This is the town of Cavrilia. And the reason I'm showing you this is that we went to Cavrilia to this particular restaurant, which is the restaurant Papo Selenio. And it was a beautiful restaurant, as you could see, with magnificent food. And we went there in the year 2010, and counterclockwise, starting from the right, is our friend Randy and her son David, and then Mary's daughter Maria Christina, and Mary straight ahead at the head of the table, Luca, Laura, and that's me right there in the front. And we had a spectacular dinner. I guess the story I should tell you very quickly is that we ordered appetizers and just a lot of courses. And the final course in the meal was a giant steak. And Luca and Mary only had some appetizers and one dish. And we were wondering why, and the reason is that by the time we got to the steak, we were completely and totally full. And we had this, I don't know, $75 worth of steaks coming out. And the owner, who is the fellow on the left, saw that we were leaning back in our chairs, extremely full, and he whispered something to Luca, and Luca whispered something back to him, and he said that he would cancel the steaks, we didn't have to eat them, and we were just completely relieved. It would have been obviously delicious, but we just could not do it, and we thanked the fellow on the left and the waiter, who was the fellow on the right. So that was a really wonderful thing that he did for us. So this is the last trip, and this is Luca's car, and Luca is going to be driving us to the town of Volpaia, and this is the road we took, leaving Fellini Valdarno, headed south and slightly to the west to Volpaia, and that's the destination that we were headed towards, and that is the theme of show number 119, the town of Volpaia. So there's a picture of Luca and Mary and me standing in front of the restaurant that Luca and Mary selected for us to eat, which turned out to be the highlight of this particular excursion, which I'll talk about in a few moments. But this is the countryside around the town of Volpaia, and you could see how absolutely magnificent that looks, with the hills in the background and the vineyards in the front. You can see the vineyards are very active now because this is late May, and the cypress trees over there on the left side. Just a gorgeous view of Chianti. Here's a slightly different view looking basically in the same direction. I think the direction we're looking now is south. I don't, if Luca is watching this or will be watching this, he might be, saying, oh no, he's got that wrong. But I think we're looking south because those hills look like the hills that are a little further south. But we also could be looking to the northeast, which is also hilly in the Tuscan region. So I'm really not sure of the direction. But I only know that this is really magnificent country. And we wind up in the town of Volpaia. You can see that it says Castello di Volpaia, and the reason is that this was originally, as many towns in Tuscany were, a castle, and the castle was built in the 10th century. The name Volpaia, as the name of the town, came into being in the 12th century, and the castle was actually used, as many, many castles are used in Tuscany, during the wars between Florence and Siena. And the town's predominant family was the Volpaia family, which were clockmakers. And Volpaia is now known for vacations, and because of its really beautiful location. I know when I Googled the town of Volpaia, I kept coming across websites that were advertising apartments that you could stay in. And we'll show you some of the scenes of what the apartments look like from the outside, and some of them are really amazing. But here is the town. As you could see, the clock tower right in the center. And this is just as we had parked the car and then walked into the town, and Luca and Mary selected that restaurant right there in the front. We requested a table outdoors. You could see that there are a lot of people seated outdoors, but we could not get a table outdoors. And we had to go in the restaurant, which was not so terrible either. It was a pretty restaurant. And the table we had was right by the window. But this is the wine that Luca ordered. And then we had, actually, Laura explained, I wasn't sure what we had ordered that day, so I wasn't completely sure. But it turned out that Luca and Mary decided that we should have this antipasto here, which consisted of some cheeses and, as you could see, some other meats with the bread over there on the left side. So, so we were going to be having, they were planning on having a meal which consisted mostly of these appetizers plus bruschetta. Now, let me see if I can remember the education that I received by Luca and Laura, who explained what the different bruschetta, I should say bruschetta, which is the plural of bruschetta. So these right here, of course, is bruschetta with tomatoes and basil. That's easy for me. The bruschetta with cheese and sausage is right down here at the bottom. And then the bruschetta with cheese and herbs is right over here on the top. Okay, so everybody's plan was to pretty much have a meal consisting of wine and appetizers, including the bruschetta. Here's some more. There's, again, the bruschetta with tomatoes. And then the one that I haven't mentioned yet is the one on the top. Go back a minute. Yeah, I failed to mention what this one was. This was a bruschetta with bacon and mozzarella. Okay, so that takes care of all of the bruschetta in that picture. And in this picture, we also have eggplant, garlic, and parsley. Does that look like that right up here? That sort of looks like it could be. Help me out here, Alan. Eggplant, garlic, and parsley, right? That sort of looks like that. Okay, so that's what everybody was eating, including me. But apparently, and there's another appetizer that they brought over. This is chicken livers with bread, and everything was just amazingly delicious. But for some reason, so that was really plenty of food with all of that I just showed you. Nonetheless, I ordered my own lasagna for some reason, so I had that, and everybody else was eating the other things. And that was really the highlight of the afternoon, this unbelievably wonderful experience of eating, some of the really great food that, we've had on the trip. And then we, just walked around a little more. There's a name of the restaurant here, here it is on the side, Bar Ucci. That's the name of the place in which we ate. So, I could recommend that very strongly. That's a great restaurant. And if you can get a table outside, then, of course, it's really beautiful. And then, of course, after lunch, we walked around the town. And, there isn't really much to say. I don't know that much about this town, mainly because there isn't much that's online that I came across, but you know, this is what the town looks like, and it was, you know, it's just a spectacular experience just walking around the town with the weather quite beautiful, and some of the scenes you're about to see. And there are some motorcycles and Vespas over there on the right side. And mostly stone houses. And as you can see, some pretty magnificent stone houses with some, you know, narrow alleyways and just magnificent. And again, as I've said many times, Laura enjoys taking doors, so there's a very interesting door, and there's a really spectacular looking door. And this is a gorgeous view, I think, because of the, you know, the two trees on the left and the right, and the archway there. And you know, as you walk around the town, these are some of the views you get. I love this photo because, you know, you can see how rustic and quaint this town is with the Vespa over there in the distance. So that's, you know, obviously somebody's residence over there on the right side. You can see the door on the right side, and then you see their mode of transportation right outside the door. A lot of steps, a lot of, you know, stone houses, adorned with really beautiful flowers. Another magnificent door. You know, and again, here's, you know, a spectacular picture with flowers and stone houses and a car all the way in the back there peeking out. Luca and Mary reading some plaque on the wall. You know, and as you know, I just find these pictures spectacular with the arches, and you know, the house goes right above the arch. It reminds me very much of, in Venice, what's called a sotto portico, which is, you know, just like an arch that leads to a very small alleyway that leads to another part of town. In Venice, they're much longer. These are much shorter distances. And, you know, you can imagine the people that live in this house or rent this house, and this is the view you get. And then, you know, we came upon a house, and this was the view from the house at the landscape around the house. With the spectacular, you know, landscape there in the distance. And there's the house over there on the left with the swimming pool right in the front. And these were some of the houses that you could actually rent for a period of time. And then, use this as a base to travel around. As you could see from that original map, Volpaia is really right in the center of Chianti, where you have all the towns right around it. So that would really be, if you were not, totally terrified of driving on these narrow, windy roads heading into these tiny little towns, that would be a really nice place to use as a base for exploring the Chianti region. We never, actually went inside for the obvious reason that, somebody could be living in there, and we didn't want to intrude on them, of course. But that's what, the entrance is, and again, what they have as a view from their house. An outdoor patio. Some of the, narrow winding paths leading around the town. Yet another door. So that's, pretty down to earth there. Obviously somebody is drying off something by just simply throwing it out the window. I guess they don't have a dryer. Or those people didn't anyway. I'm not sure if the town does have dryers. Beautiful stone houses. And a photograph of Luca and I. And I believe now we're back in the center of town. And we passed some restaurants along the way. That looked like a really nice restaurant. And the restaurant that we actually ate in, Bar Ucci. Some more views from the town, looking at the landscape, countryside. And Mary loves dogs and has a dog of her own, but she stopped to pet this dog. I remember that. Amid this magnificent, the magnificent panorama. And we might be back on the road now. Well, we are. And headed back to Felinia Valdarno, where Luca and Mary live. A solitary house right there in the middle of that photo. And I believe that's Volpaia from a distance. Oh, I know. And then we went to a castle. So Luca apparently passed a castle and said, "Would you like to go in?" We said, "Okay." And we couldn't figure out what the name of this castle was. So I couldn't tell you. I couldn't remember. I didn't have it in my notes. And when I emailed Luca, he wasn't sure either. But it was a really beautiful experience walking around. And the view from the castle looking out. I don't remember going into the castle, but we walked around the grounds probably for about a half hour before getting back on the road. And I think now we're back on the road, headed back to Foligno Valdarno. And we're now back at Luca and Mary's house, and that's Greta, Luca's daughter, who then, we stayed, I think, at Luca's house for a while, and then we went back to Florence, and Greta took us back. So Greta was going into Florence, so we simply followed her, took us on the train, and we wound up back at Florence. And many thanks to Luca and Mary for showing us around. We just get in their car and, off we go. So, many thanks to them. And next on Alan's Italy, I'm going to take a look at when you go to Varenna on Lake Como. What you do when you're on Lake Como is visit some of the islands and, excuse me, not the islands, but the villas in the various towns. I was thinking of Lake Maggiore when I said the islands. There are no islands that we've ever visited, I think. But, you go and you visit the villas and you visit the little towns. And this is two of the things we did when we were in Varenna. So I will be focusing on that on the next Alan's Italy. And that brings us to, okay, well, that's not working out too well. Projects, okay, so this is where I want, I believe. Okay, so thank you for watching this evening. I hope you enjoyed the show, and please join us again next time. Until then, buonanotte e buona fortuna.